Okay, and I'm going to share. We have a bunch today, but I also think that there might be some time for discussion if we need it. I want to give you a little bit of feedback on the assignments that were due over the vacation. Want to spend a little bit more time talking about questions. We are kind of getting into a new section of questions, but I also want to give you some insight on some of the questions that you're already working on. We'll talk about the new material in the book on building a team and some of the rules that those folks will have leading up to what is going to be our next assignment, which is due this Saturday as a forum post, small four-point post. But I want you to start identifying folks that are on or would be on your team with that. So the introductions that you did, one of the things that I have to say, and this comes through on the videos, is how comfortable everybody is now in introducing themselves and their values. There's no like thoughts or delay or having to read. I mean, people are jumping right in and they're talking about themselves and what they value. And because that is so comfortable, I think that there's even a comfort and an ease in the transition to the next part. So that part is coming along wonderfully. And the other thing that I would say is that as you're thinking about your introduction and your Odyssey plans, one of the things that's starting to come together now, and you see this on the prototype planning sheet, rather than having you ask individual questions for each plan, you've seen and now you've done, we've started to combine those questions into unknowns that we would like to know, right? So that part one of the Odyssey planning sheet, or excuse me, the prototype planning sheet, I don't care which of the Odyssey plans the questions or the unknowns come from. I just ask you for a list of your top 5, right, on that list. And so you have now gone through and identified the top things that you want to know. And what we're doing now is we're moving on from the Odyssey plan and starting to consider what we might put together to explore this course of study that would lead us to, you know, a joyful and fulfilling life. Is those things are starting to come together now. You're starting to come up with a number of questions that you want to know. And those things might be based on one plan versus another, or some of you might now be considering how you could combine a couple of plans together. So that's one piece. And keeping in mind that because you have already identified these 2 or 3 plans, by looking at divergent possibilities, you're going to get more creativity, right? The more options, the more disparate options you get, the more radically different options you're going to get, the more creative solutions that you might find. And that's what we're really trying to get at with this. The other thing that I'll point out is I want to get back to the arc of our story. And a lot of the things come from a challenge we face, the choices that we make to overcome that challenge, and then the outcome that's there. One of the things that I asked you to do was to identify how these questions are coming together, and those collective questions and what you are exploring have become your challenge. That's what you're working on now. Those are the answers that you're trying to find. And the answers that you get as you start to have these interviews and you start to write down on section 3 of that sheet and you start to collect those insights, those are the choices that you will have to explore. You don't have to explore all of them, and they don't all have to come out to a great result. But you, again, in facing a challenge, you then have a number of choices that you are considering for an outcome that will develop, right? Because, and I bring that up now, one, because it's demonstrating itself all by itself, right? In the way that you're talking about it. But also because as we get towards the end of the course here, the end of the month, your final story of self and the after action plan is going to be identifying this challenge, being able to try to find this course of study and co-curricular activities that are going to lead me to this job or career. The choices that you have been given and then you're going to explore either through electives or internships or interviews or clubs or meetings or seminars or part-time jobs, right? And then what you hope the outcome to be, right? To be able to choose a major and eventually a career. One of the ways that you can convey this in your story is that you can just come right out. I'm trying to connect my values or my passions that you've already identified for law, helping people, social justice, with a major or course of study or a career. You can come right out and say that, right? So what you have now is a structure for this talk and this introduction that you're going to provide.
Oh, wait.
All good? Happens. Okay. So let me start again. Sorry about that. One of the things that you want to be able to do is you want to be able to convey this challenge, this thing that you're going through, to the people that you're meeting with so that they know how to help you, right? They know what you're going through, and you can summarize that. So after you've told them their values and what you're about, the next step is, hey, we're meeting now, right? We're engaging in this thing, and this is why. And what they're going to help you with is you're trying to connect your values or your passion for something with a major or a course of study or a career. That's why you're doing this. Okay, so again, we have a structure here. This feedback now is next level stuff, right? I don't want to say it's frosting because it's more substantial than that. Make no mistake, the frosting is the most substantial part of the cake or the cookie. But this is a piece now that we can start to develop subtly for your Alejandro, you want to mute yourself, dude? There you go. As you're getting into these conversations, okay? The next piece is you're going to be meeting with a lot of different people who have a lot of different expertise and a number of different relationships to you, right? For the people that you know, maybe people that you talked to this week that are part of your family or close relationship, it's not as huge of a deal, although it's helpful, right? It's very helpful. I find that when I'm talking to those people, if I'm not very specific about what it is that I want, that will be a long and winding conversation because of the comfort level that I find with them. But if you're meeting with somebody for the first time, or somebody that you don't meet with often, a professor in another discipline, or one of the folks that you've identified on Loyola Connect, one of the things that you want to do is to make them feel like they're special. Like, why have you identified them? Why have you called them to be able to help and assist you, right? And so as you're getting into that transition question, one of the things that you can address is like, hey, I wanted to talk to you because you have experience in, or you have experienced, or you were a student at Loyola who has also gone through, right? There's something about their profile on Loyola Connect, or something about them that was told to you in the introduction that led you to this connection. Go ahead and say what that is, right? Because you want them also to know that their time is valued and that there is more that went into it than, hey, I needed to do this for a class, so we need to talk so I can fill the stuff out. Some actual thought went into it, and you value their time and their expertise, and you've identified why. And think about this. We've been talking about this since the beginning of the course when we did Chisholm and the feedback, right? One of the roles that you have is being able to provide somebody with a big view of what's going on, right? As you're providing feedback, you want to be able to give somebody a view, sorry. You want to be able to give somebody a really good idea of what it is that you want and why. Why have you chosen them? Right? If you've asked somebody for feedback, you need to value their time. And one of the ways that you can value their time is to specifically tell them how it is that they can help you. So there's a little bit of a difference that we started to get at right before break about the life design general questions and the introductory questions that you would want to ask somebody. And really, when you're meeting with somebody for the first time, you want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, right? A lot of times they might jump in, but usually you will be asserting leadership of the meeting or the interaction, and so you're going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves after you've given your introduction, right? And that does a couple of things. Number one, it allows them a little bit of transition. If you have a 2 o'clock meeting with somebody, you have no idea what they were doing at 2 minutes to 2. They could have been in a budget meeting, they could have been firing somebody, right? And so it's really important to give them an opportunity to kind of wade into the conversation and make this more of a relationship building thing than a transaction. You will find some people that are very busy and they might just be a little bit quick about it. It's like, okay, what is it? Why are we together here? And then you might need to get cut to the chase a little bit. But for the most part, if you're reaching out to somebody on Loyola Connect that has said that they're willing to do this, they'll give you their time, right? And we talk about this all the time. When we get into things like the enrichment process, or we jump into a design process, we talk about an icebreaker. We want somebody to start to get into a creative or a collaborative mindset. So we do popcorn, right? And that's to make sure everybody is paying attention to each other and we're all present in the space. By asking somebody that type of a question to introduce themselves, you are giving them the opportunity to do that. And one of the ways to do that, as I was alluding to in the last slide, one of the ways to do that is to be very clear about while they're there and to ask them. I was hoping we could start by having you tell me about your experience at Loyola, Under Armour, your firm, and your path to your current position. That is an easy softball transition question, and you have them talking about themselves, which is the whole point of the interview, right? This is similar to one of the questions that was in the handout. Would you tell me a bit more about your path from college to where you are today? Right, maybe a little bit more conversation, right? Which brings me to another point. You have questions that you have developed that specifically get at your unknowns and information that you want. We've also given you a number of questions in the text or in the handout that we used for the enrichment session. You can use all of those. There's no rule that says you have to use 5 questions. There is a rule that I would like you to have at least 5 to come to the table with that you're interested in this process. But you might not ask all of those questions to every single person, right? And it's also quite reasonable to maybe use some of your questions and some of those more general questions that were part of the handout. So you can certainly do that. And these are a number of those questions that we had. The other thing that I want to make clear about this is that when you are asking your questions, you don't want to just ask questions about your path. So one of the things that I noticed is that a lot of the questions had to do with what major should I have? What activities should I take? What internship should I? So those are all about I, and me, which is fine. The interview is about you. But you are there to collect information about their expertise and their experience. Because don't forget, one of the great things that you have all pointed to with these jobs that you want to have the impact that you can make, and what it's like working the job. That's an experience type question, and that's something that they have. So you want to make sure that your questions about you and what you want are also balanced, and making sure that you are getting questions about their experience. So I'm going to ask the group a question here. So I'm going to ask a number of you to come back if you can. So I want to review this. When you are asking for feedback, what are your roles? What are your responsibilities as you're asking for feedback? Ethan, thank you.
Well, for one, you have to be a recorder. You have to be able to understand if you're asking for feedback, you have to record what, the person giving feedback is saying.
You're writing down and you're taking notes.
Yes. Also, you have to acknowledge their helping you and giving them the necessary feedback that you need. That's only going to help you in the long run.
Okay.
And I think that you can give alternative I guess ideas too. Maybe,
careful now, we're talking about the person asking for the feedback, not giving it. I just want to make sure you're not
sorry.
Okay. All right, no, you're good. Who else? Thanks, Ethan, for kicking us off. Who else? Oliver. Yes, sir. What's a responsibility of when you're asking for feedback?
You need to ask them for specific feedback so they're not wasting their time.
You need to ask for specific pieces, right? Either things that you need or that you're interested in, right? Signaling, or things that have to do with their expertise, right? Do you want big vision things, or you want somebody who's correcting the punctuation? I got different people for each of those things. What else? What else is your role? Caroline, what's your role for when you're asking for feedback? What's something else you need to be doing?
Like, you can't get mad when they give you feedback that you might not like.
That's helpful. That'll keep it coming. That'll keep the feedback coming, right? So very good. And how could somebody else, let's jump on and piggyback with Caroline's point. So you don't want to get mad. You want to accept it. What are some ways that you can show or demonstrate that are part of your responsibilities? Ali, what are some ways that you can show that you're accepting the feedback?
Well, if you're accepting of the feedback that you're given, you'd probably like thank them, or like kind of like point out a specific point that they make that you like.
Yeah, or yeah. So yeah, I like the direction you're going there. I think so. You want to, just like they're summarizing your work to start, you are also summarizing and reiterating the feedback that you are getting from them to your point, to make sure that you value it and that you've gotten it. Okay, so those are all very important things. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. And as we talk about this, when you are asking these questions and when you are leading into these questions, and let's go back here. I was hoping we could start by having you tell me about your experience at Loyola and your path to your current position. You could be back here. I'm trying to connect my values or passion with something. I wanted to talk to you because you have experience, or have experienced, or were a student at Loyola who has, right? So I have very clearly signaled what it is that we're here for. And I'll also point out that a couple of the strategies that people used here that I thought were effective, some people summarized a number of the questions that we were going to ask. Something along like, hey, what I'd really like to meet with you about is, and list out a summary of the 4 or 5 questions that you want to ask. Or you may say, I've been looking for people who went to Loyola, who have had careers in corporate law, that might be able to tell me a little bit about the best pathway I could take. You have very clearly signaled what it is that you are looking for, and at the same time, why it is that you have reached out to those people. And so signaling is a really big part and a benefit of asking these questions, right? But when you are asking them, you're also signaling that this is you interviewing them. Remember, that's the difference between a job interview and a life design conversation. And the other thing that you're asking for is for specific feedback. Okay. One more point on the questions. And this is something that we did in the workshop last couple of weeks ago. And by asking them questions about their experience, it's okay if you want to ask them a question about advice on what major you should take or what type of path you should take academically. That's fine, and they have experience with that. But again, what I'm seeing is that probably 3 out of 5 of most questions have to do with that. And it's also a really big deal to understand what their experience is like. What do they like? What's their day like? What don't they like? What's the most gratifying thing? How do they get to make an impact on other people, right? Really getting to questions that are about them, because that's their day and what they do, they are unquestionably experts at, even if they're not experts in the content, right? So using their experience and insight to inform and answer your question. So when you ask, what do you like about your job and your role? What gets you excited about going to work every day? Do you find that you have an opportunity to directly make a difference for? You're asking them about them. And then you can take their experience and use it to answer your questions. What I'd like you to spend a couple minutes on right now is I'd like you to go back to the questions that you used, and I'd like you to modify or add to them, right? So I would like you to make sure that you have a couple of questions about the person that you're interviewing or having the conversation with, about their experience that's specific to an expert, experience that an expert in their job might have that could influence your choice of career path. What is it that you really want to know about that job, right? Ali, you're thinking about law and accounting. What is it about being a lawyer or being an accountant that somebody could tell you that would help impact whether you want to do that? Right, Sydney, what would somebody's experience in vet medicine versus somebody's experience in law enforcement on a day-to-day level, what would impact your willingness or passion to go in one of those directions? Right? That's really what we're trying to figure out here. And so the constraints that I'm going to provide for you is that none of these new questions can have anything to do or have the words major, internship, or activities in them. So you need to put some thought in and come up with some other ones. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple minutes to work on that. Okay, I want you to take a minute with the questions that you put together and consider how your expected answers, what's the connection between the answers that you would expect to get and the experience that you've outlined or you're hoping to have from your Odyssey plans. How will these experience questions help you in crafting your joyful, fulfilling life? Okay, let's come on back. Isabel, let's share with us a new question you've asked and how it's going to connect to the experiences you'd like to have.
So my question was, what are some of the resources that you used in college that helped shape where you are today?
And what kind of answers do you think you would get from that question? What do you think? What do you think a list of resources would be?
I mean, like Loyola Connect, obviously, just like their plans, like the classes that they took
Okay.
would be a helpful,
Okay.
that'd be helpful to know.
And how would the answer? And how would those answers inform you about their experience that they're having at whatever profession that they're in, or whatever situation that they're in?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, how would the answers that you would expect to get about those resources impact your understanding or give you more information about the experience they're having in their job, their quality of life, and inform some of the questions that you might have about quality of life and experience in the job that you might be looking to have?
Yeah, I mean, just by knowing like their path, like it can help me like compare the thing, like their plan to my plan right now and like what I'm doing and see if I'm on the right like path, I guess.
Okay, so let me ask you and the group a question. If we're considering somebody's experience as a professional, pick it, lawyer, physical therapist, doctor, professional golfer, whatever it might be. When is that experience happening? Before or after college? It's after, right? So the experience that they're having and what they're living is that as their profession is happening once they're done. And so if we're interested in coming up with questions about the experience that they're having as their professional, and again, these are the experiences, if you recall on the side of the Odyssey plans, and we workshopped this a little bit, when you started to identify what kind of experience did you want to have, what role do you want to play? What social experience will you be having? What impact will you be making? So when you're thinking about what somebody has an expertise in their job and the experience that they're having in that profession, that is something that is ongoing after school, right? So one of the things that I'd like you to consider you plural, collectively, is what kind of questions could you ask that would get at that? And how would that help inform you on the decision that you're trying to make and what profession to have? Okay, as opposed to major activities, like things that you could do while you're as an undergrad, because you guys you've got those questions. Like there's no question in my mind that you have those questions, which is why we're trying to expand it to go the other way. Okay. Abby, what'd you come up with? Thank you, Isabella, for sharing.
I wrote for one of my questions. Did ball change the way in which you play a role in society?
Could you say it again? You're just kind of breaking up a little bit. Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, sorry. I said, how did ball change the way in which you play a role in society?
Okay, and what kind of answers do you think you would get from that question? What would you be looking for that would say, hey, I really want to do this, or this might not be for me?
I feel like depending on what type of ball they're in, it would help me answer the question of like how impactful they are, or how impactful like how they've been able to like influence other people's lives in a positive way.
Okay. Okay. And again, in all fairness, and you know, the impact that you're going to make is one of those cues that we used to help define the experience in the Odyssey plan, right? So you're basically asking them what kind of impact, and you are looking, I'm going to guess, Abby, you've talked about this, you're looking to make an impact in some way and want to make sure that it's aligned with your values and something that you're into doing. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Carson, what kind of questions you come up with? The experience of an engineer or a coach?
Yeah, so I had a question for an engineer, and I was gonna say, what was your career path like going out of school? Like, what was your jobs? Like, what jobs did you do while you're in school and going out into the real world, and like what jobs you'd be doing? Like,
okay, what would that? How might that impact your view on what the experience of an engineer would be?
Well, I don't know where to start, so I was hoping to find out more information about where to start getting into the field, into like the different fields of engineering, and where like to begin to find my first job, kind of, because I know that I'm not going to get the top like best job right out of school, so I want to know how I could like go in that direction to figure out like how I would develop my skills and be able to reach that.
Okay, so I'm gonna dig down a little bit on your question. So I see where you're going there, and I appreciate that. Are you asking that because you want to know the pathway, or are you asking that question because you want to know how arduous, rewarding, difficult, amazing the pathway might be?
I say both, because I want to know like what kind of things I need to have ready, or what I need to do like in order to keep. Sorry,
Okay.
I have roommates in my
No, it's
room.
okay, it's fine. It's a cool thing, man. It's fine.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I want to know both. I want to know like how it feels to be like going through your career, and like what steps like that person took, so I can kind of understand like how I should feel, or if I feel like I'm in a good spot.
Okay, so what I'm going to ask you, very similar to what we did a little bit earlier. So I appreciate that your focus is after school, but I want to make sure that you're not just talking about pathway questions that somebody could write down on a piece of paper and say, do these 4 things on a checklist. I mean, that's helpful. But how would you ask the questions to know which pathways sucked, which ones were more rewarding? What were the things they liked? What were the things they didn't like? Could you frame those questions in a way, if you're going to do both things, right? If you're interested in both things, I would encourage you to ask questions both ways, right? So one is a black and white, what is the pathway? very, one is, would you do it again? Right? If you talk to folks in, investment banking, Wall Street, engineering, a lot of the law in a big firm, a lot of the professions where you might be talking with somebody who's kind of at I think medicine is one too, where you're might be talking to somebody who's at the top of the pyramid a little bit, right? And who achieved, partner, attending physician, something like that. Ask those people if they would do it again, right? So if you're talking to somebody who's an accomplished engineer and they tell you that pathway, say, was it worth it? Would you do it again? I think you'll start to get the experience, or it will start to inform you how difficult, rigorous, or rewarding that experience is. Hi, Eddie, yes.
Well, my question was very similar. Mine was two-parted. I asked what steps did you take, and then what would you change?
Yeah, right. So so there's the checklist part. I don't want to minimize, but you know what I'm talking about. They can just tell you the checklist. But then there's an analysis, right, in a prioritization. So I think that if you're getting at that, because now there's going to be value added to that. That's what you want to get. That's what you want to get. So I think that's a good way to do it. Carson, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Right. Yep. Because again, I mean, there's a number of these professions that pretty much most of them, when you're starting, it's hard, right? You have to put in your time. Okay, so I think you get the point there. We're just, again, we're trying to get at the experience when you get out and what they're living, because again, they can tell you about what to happen in school, but I think what the reason that I'm making this a big issue is that depending on, if you were to get somebody from the class of 18 and you were to ask a question about what's going on in school, I think that they would be quite well qualified to tell you that, and they would feel very comfortable because it was a couple of years ago. I mean, if somebody asked you, if a junior from your high school asked you, hey, what are the things that you needed to do to prepare to get to the school you wanted to go to? Most of you would feel pretty comfortable in doing that because that process just happened. But if you get somebody that's been out 6, 8, 18, 20 years, Loyola was a lot different place then. If you're into the 20s and 30s of years, they'll be like, well, one, it would have been nice if women were going to the school, right? I mean, you could start to get answers like that. Or if there were dorms, right? Because Loyola was a commuter school for the most part for a long time, until about 20, 25 years ago. So you want to be able to get at questions that they are the experts in answering, and that is the experience that they've had in their profession. Okay. And I think quite honestly, a lot of people my age would be more comfortable answering those questions because that's what they know, right? That's what they know. The other piece that I would encourage too, and we'll get into this in a little bit when we start to talk about the different types of people that would be on your team. And I'm already, for a number of you, starting to think about students that I'm going to, suggest connecting you with that have been fussing with the same types of things or questions that you have. The people that are going through this right now, or that have just gone through it, that might be at the point where they're studying for the LSATs or applying to graduate school or have just come off of internships. Unfortunately, the seniors are not just coming back from study away because of what happened last year, unless they did it in the fall. So you might have some seniors that studied in the fall last year. They're here. So feel free to be able to use your peers. And again, asking, if you're having a meeting with a professor or somebody like me that has taught a number of students, or especially Father Brown, say, hey, is there somebody else that's done this? Your peers are going to be great resources for you. So please don't forget them in your list. Okay, thanks everybody for sharing that. Okay, let me ask you, I want to talk a little bit about mentorship. I didn't used to have this conversation, but I started having it a couple years ago. Raise your hand, either literally if you're on screen, or you can use a little cartoon one. If you have been told that it would be helpful if you went and found a mentor, or you should get a mentor to help you that. How many people have been told that? I've been told that a number of times, right? How many people have been, is there anybody that has not been told that? Or had it been suggested that you go and find a mentor? Any of you people that are, yeah, thanks. Which one, Nick? To find or not to find?
I haven't been told to find
You
one.
haven't found, okay. So 1 out of 11, that's probably about right. I would expect maybe 1 or 2 have not. Now, Nick, let me ask you a question. If you were asked to find a mentor, are you somebody that would seek one out, or would you try to go solo?
I feel like I would definitely try to go seek one out. I just think it's a lot easier.
Okay, that's fair. So how many of you that have, is there anybody on here that has actually been taught what to look for in a mentor, or what a good mentor is? Ethan, what were you taught? Who taught you that?
So I actually had a mentorship program in senior year of high school. So at the time I was completing an AP portfolio for art, and my teacher is my mentor. That's the program that we had. And she would basically, I would have meetings with her, and she would kind of guide me through a conceptual design process.
Okay.
And basically kind of giving me, you know, food for thought and ideas that could kind of push me off into just creating this work, not necessarily giving me straightforward ideas and, you know, kind of using hers, but sorry.
So I was going to ask you a question. In that whole process, when you picked your teacher, did somebody teach you what a good mentor is?
No, not necessarily.
If I were to ask you, hey, Nick, or excuse me, hey, Ethan, was your teacher a good mentor? And you might say yes. And then my question would be based on what criteria?
Yeah.
And right. So did somebody teach you what a good mentor was? Or you just had a great relationship with somebody who led you? Because quite honestly, that's usually how it happens, to be quite frank, is that most people will get decent mentors that know about mentors, have had decent mentorship. And most people that have had bad mentors probably don't know, because they get out of it. Like they wouldn't even, it's like.
So I haven't been taught, I guess, how, but my grandpa, he was a mentor for,
so there's modeling.
Yeah, so kind of modeling, I guess you could say.
Okay. See, and this is the thing, and you know, like a lot of you, I was always told you need to find a mentor. A mentor will help you do this and that and be able to move you along. But I have to tell you, it wasn't until I was in my early 30s that I realized the value of good mentorship, because I got awful mentorship, and got awful advice. And it took me a long time to realize that it wasn't me. I wasn't thinking about things incorrectly. I just thought that I just was not doing the right things, and that I wasn't doing this career path and what I thought I should be doing the right way, because I was being told by this mentor that I wasn't. And, you know, saying something, so there's a number of you that have taken basic sciences courses. You know, as a young faculty member at the University of Maryland, I was assigned a mentor. I didn't find one, I was assigned one, who basically told me, after I'd had these grants in clinical research, so I was working with humans, that you need to go start finding the mechanisms, which are like the benchtop stuff with pipettes and in dishes. You need to find the mechanisms of why these things are happening in tissue. I'd never taken any of those classes, let alone done the research. That was awful advice to get. It's sidetracked me for 3 years. And when I see young students, we show, I ran a program for the AARP Foundation, where we had 300 older African-American predominantly volunteers that were working with Baltimore City students on literacy but also being mentors. And so we went through a lot of rigor to train them as mentors. And I started to realize how involved a process this is, and that most people are not told or learn or exposed to the role of a mentor. So one of the things that I want to bring up today, and it gets into the chapter 11 in designing your life, and I know we've skipped ahead a little bit, but I think it goes into what we're talking about here with your life design conversations, is this whole idea of mentorship. And there are a couple of dysfunctional beliefs. There's a dysfunctional belief that they start with, and that is that it's my life, I have to design it myself, right? I'm going to go through this process and I need to make decisions. And if I really have my life together, or I really have a direction, or, you know, I'm smart, I'm supposed to have all of these answers myself. And the reframe to that, the first reframe to that in the book is you live and design your life with on the collaboration of others. There's always people that are helping you, willing to help you, that will help provide a much richer environment for you. And one of the other things that I've learned as I've gotten back into teaching full time the last 4 or 5 years, and this is a little bit of a difference in students in the last 15 or 20 years that I've seen, is that you have to be willing to be able to seek out a mentor and ask for help, right? Asking somebody to help you. And there is such an emphasis now, and things are so competitive to get into school or to move up, that you're supposed to do it yourself, right? Again, a year ago, you were all applying to schools and you had to write your essays and talked about all the leadership activities that you had, and that we're supposed to lead, and following's not good, and you're supposed to take initiative. And really, that's very difficult, right? So you need to be able to find help. And the second reframe there is, it's okay and I won't look weak if I ask for help, right? And the third one that they talked about in the book is that, well, I'll feel like I'm bothering somebody if I ask for help. And the reality here is that if you do ask for help, especially these folks you're going to reach out to on Loyola Connect, or even people back home, reaching out and looking for collaboration, mentorship will be wildly positively reinforced and encouraged, right? For a number of reasons. One, people really love to do it for the most part. If you start getting into the professional area, most people understand that this is how things work. People don't work on their own for the most part when they're out in the real world. So if you have the skills to be able to seek out and develop these collaborations, that's a real positive. And third, those folks know that people who do try to forge out on their own are less successful. We know for a fact with the literature and the research and entrepreneurship that individually started businesses that are not part of teams are much less likely to move forward and move to scale. Most companies are done with collaboration. The other thing that I will say is that there is a much higher success rate for organizations and leadership teams and new entrepreneurial ventures that include women, right? So you need to have folks involved to be able to do this. And a big part of that involvement is finding a good mentor. And certainly you can do that, and we want them to be able to contribute to, you know, creative competence and have you be able to get feedback, create a polar engagement when there's disagreement and diverse thought that really drives creativity. But with the mentorship, you want to also be able to take advantage of the three things that we discussed in the enrichment, which is advice, inspiration, and opening doors, right? Especially the opening doors piece, right? We talked about that in the book, that the life design interviews are great, but you need to have it's much better if you have somebody that's directed you. Loyola Connect is the door opener, right? The fact that you are part of the Loyola community, it does that. And as you get into this work with mentors, keeping in mind that you are working together on your future, on your life, on your career, on your experience with a family. They use some examples in the book about, men getting together with other fathers, right? You are getting together. And I want to bring up this idea of co-creation, because we are going through a design lens here. And the idea of co-creation is that in a human-centered mindset, when you go out and you talk to your users or experts and you get feedback from them, you're going to use that feedback to help inform the plan or venture that you're going to create. And then you go and create it. And then you come back to them to ask them how you've done. Is this the vision that you had? Is this what you meant? Is this what you were referring to? Or if they're users of a potential product or venture, will this help solve your pain point? Will this make things easier for you? So there is a co-creation type of an environment that I think fits in, a mindset that fits in really well as you are trying to design your own career path or course of study forward, right? And so there's this cycle of asking for feedback, writing it down, which we're going to be doing in part 3 of the prototype planning process, making some decisions, trying it out so that there's an outcome, and then going back and either telling them what they did, you're giving them feedback on their advice, which is one of the roles, as Ali pointed out, right? And you go through the cycle again. Hey, that's not quite what I meant. Or hey, that's a really good idea. We weren't thinking about that. Could you also? And that is a process. And when you get into that process, notice that's not transactional. That is a longer term engagement. And that's one of the benefits of mentorship. And I would also suggest to you that you have more than one that has roles, that does different things for your different roles, right? And I would ask you the question, will you create better, more creative plans with fewer or more information and choices, right? We know that the answer to that is, of course, more. It's always more. More is almost always better. More diverse is almost always better. And so if you have a number of mentors and you're getting feedback from all of them, you're going to be able to craft a more creative choice potentially, or unlock a pathway forward that you might not have considered, or build onto a choice that somebody else has opened up for you. And so in this next chapter that we're getting into, when you're building your team, we really want to put some thought into, interdisciplinary mix of thinkers. Doers are much more, as you'll find, are much more helpful to address your design challenge. And in this case, it's the designing of your life. And so the way that this will work potentially is that there'll be an introduction made. You've already been working on that, right? You've got it on video now. You'll try to share values, and remember, when you have those interactions, you're trying to share experiences to build some intimacy, and then there will be a specific ask for feedback. That's your role in asking for feedback. There's going to be a specific ask. They will give you advice, information, or potentially open doors for you. If they don't, or if it's something that wasn't really a great fit, either personally or content-wise, just thankful for the experience and move on. But if it's something that might be useful to you, or there's a real connection there, or a real interest, you'll use the information they have given you to answer your questions and to make them part of your plan, right? To Isabella's point earlier, if she asks her question about things that she can do while she's here, experiences, or Carson's later on about pathway, you can iterate those things and make them part of your plan and prototype them and try them. Take the class, go to the club, apply for the internship, right? Bias to action, you're actually going to move. And then once you do that, you can go back to them. And I would encourage you, if you ever ask anybody for a letter of recommendation or for advice, and you go out and do it, especially if it works out well, but even if it doesn't, tell them how it worked out, or tell her how it worked out. And that becomes a cycle, right? So in this process, I want to make a couple of points. You certainly want to make a good impression on these people. You would like them to open doors. You would like them to be helpful to you. But more importantly, you want to be able to get the answers to the questions that you need. So yes, it's very important that you prepare and you have questions and you rehearse and you do all the things that we talk about. But don't forget, you're trying them out too. Okay? You're trying them out to see if there is a connection there, if there's some value there, if they might be somebody who you could put on your team and continuously talk to over time, right? So it's a tryout for you as well. Okay. And the other thing I want to point out here, because it has been part, and this is going, like I said, it's going to come together as part of a story for you and what you have gone through this semester and will continue to go through as you do these things. You know, you have a challenge right now. That's being able to figure out the best path for you, major activities, fulfilling life afterwards, right? And you're going to get some advice and you're going to make some decisions. You don't have to take every piece of advice or inspiration or counsel that you get, right? But you're going to make some choices about what you're going to try, and then you're going to try them. That's your outcome. You're coming with a challenge. You're identifying choices. You're going to try them out. That's an outcome. And it continually goes into a circle. A number of roles are brought up in the book. The first was this role of supporters. These are pretty common folks that are around you. You also find that they change. Your supporters now in your dorm and the courses in this section of Messina will be pretty important now, and a lot of those people will continue to be, but that will change. You get more interested in more things on campus and move along. So, you know, friends, people that are interested and who care about you, right? And your friends certainly do that. They're close enough to you to get valued feedback, right? About a course, about a professor. Maybe as you're going through housing, about a dorm that you should live in, or people to get involved with, right? Players are people that are actually doing the things that you are interested in. So those could be teammates or colleagues, or like I said, your classmates, your colleagues at Loyola that are a year or two or three ahead of you. They're doing the things that you want to do. And when you get into the workforce, people that you're working with, right? So players are experts in what you want to do because they have experience and are actually doing it. These could very well be your life design contacts. These are players just by virtue of the fact that you've identified them because they are doing something that you are interested in. Intimates are your closest family and friends. Now, the intimates are involved one way or another, right? They're not necessarily actively chosen to be part of what you're doing, but they are, right? Your sisters, your parents, brother, aunt and uncle, really close people from home, your best friends. These are your intimate. They're involved in everything that you do. They're not, like I said, they're not necessarily chosen, but they're going to be part of any of the process that's there. Now, the one thing to bring up with this group is that they might be very close to you, but as a lot of you know, and some of you have talked about it in class, just because it's your parent or your sister doesn't mean that they're not biased about what you're supposed to do, right? And we've talked about that. A lot of careers, these are things that are the right things to do, or you're supposed to do them, or a way that you should act or should move forward, right? There was an SNL skit about that this past night about being a creative writer versus a doctor, right? The parents might not necessarily be unbiased, but they're involved, right? And that could be great too. The last piece are the mentors. These are longer term people that you do choose, and they help to choose you, and they're invested in you. And most importantly, their value is based on the breadth of experience that they have and their objectivity. And that's a really big piece, right? Because what I didn't tell you and what I didn't understand is that the mentor that I was assigned, who was the chair of the research department, he was interested in having me be successful as a new investigator and a new faculty member because it would make the department look better. But he was also interested in all the other investigators. And he was also interested in making sure that I didn't want too much space or get too many resources for equipment for my lab, because he was in charge and was invested in a lot of different people. And guess what? He wasn't a clinical researcher. He was a basic scientist. So the main piece of advice that I got was from his lens. So his role could have been more as a player, because he was a colleague who was involved in what I was doing, but by no means was he a mentor. A mentor is somebody that has your interests in mind first and foremost, right? So your direct supervisor may be a role model for you, and they might be a mentor, but you also have to understand their interests, because their interests are also the financial and operational viability of the group that you're working with, which means that they have contesting and competing interests. So when you're trying to find folks that are mentors for you in these long-range engagements, ask yourself this question: what are their interests? Are they competing with mine? It's okay if they are, but you just need to know. And I think that if there was one thing that I didn't know that I know now, is that the mentors that I have to be first and foremost in our conversations about my interests. Right? Ethan, there's no question in my mind that your teacher wanted the best thing for you, and that she probably views all of her students that were promising in the arts equally, and she wouldn't have you competing against each other. But I would ask you a question: if that is that there was a competitive fellowship or award that had to be given, and it relied on one letter from her, who would get it? That's not necessarily a bad thing, but at that point in time, she might not be all in on your camp. She was mentoring a number of great students. Right?
Yeah.
What a blessing, and what a blessing that would be for her,
Yeah.
to be quite honest
Yeah.
with you, right? Again, that's not, I'm not saying that in a malicious way, but that is, as opposed to somebody who was outside of that could.
Yeah, and she was mentoring other students too.
Yeah,
so-
absolutely. That's
yeah.
what it's supposed, like, we all, that's why we do this. It's not the money. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So 2 other pieces, and I know we talked about this last time, but it's in the book, and so I want to bring it up. Difference between advice and counsel. Advice is somebody telling you what he or she thinks, what they would do in your situation. It's not bad, but it's based on what they would do, and it's based on them. It's more transactional, it's much faster. The key indicator that you're getting advice, if I were you when I was your age, always, or if people say the words always or never, very seldom are things always or never. Right? So if you're getting those things, that might be advice. Again, it's totally fine, especially if that's what you want, right? Let's think about signaling again. Expansive versus reductive thinking. They're both fine, just not together. So if you've got a quick deadline and you need to decide between a couple of things, and you're like, hey, look, I just need your advice. Which one of these would you do? Think of how I asked that. Which one of these things would you do? You do not want 16 questions about my values and what I do and what I'm thinking, and that's not what you're asking for. You want to get it and move on, as opposed to counsel, which is when somebody has a longer term ability to try to help you figure out what you think. Leaves you in a clearer, more settled state of mind. That's how you know. What is it you're thinking? What might be impacting your thought? What have you said in the past that you value or is important to you? Those are all about you. The key indicator, and again, we talked about this today when we were applying the basic premises of asking for and providing feedback. They're summarizing your point of view. That sounds familiar. That's the role of both people in feedback. Asking clarifying questions. That's part of both people's roles in feedback, right? And it's very human-centered, right? When we say that, it's a 360-degree view of your experience, what your pain points are, what it feels like, what it smells like, what the impact will be. How do you view success? Right? And that's empathy. So for next week, or excuse me, for Thursday, I'm going to ask you very succinctly I want you to name somebody who's been a valuable mentor to you in the past. What role did they fill? And why were they valuable? In other words, what did they help you through or do? And again, 30 seconds tops, right? So that's why I'm giving you the popcorn ahead of time today. There's going to be an introduction to the prototype planning worksheet, part 3. We're going to go through how to start collecting the insights that you get. If you haven't read it, please go through. I know it's the first day back, so a lot of people kind of checked in today, and that's totally fine. Please go through chapter 11 in the text. And I'm hoping, and this is not me today, right? This is the most you've heard me talk since probably the first day. So we're going to try to get more engaged with the cameras on and everything on Thursday. So welcome back, everybody. I'll give you a few minutes. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.